I never thought silence could hurt so much until that moment. Standing there in the university parking lot, holding a gift I had wrapped with such care, watching my son, my only child, turn his back on me like I was a stranger who had interrupted his celebration. "Oh, Mom, that was yesterday." Those 5 words still echo in my chest, even now. Not, "I'm sorry you missed it." Not, "Thank you for driving 10 hours to be here." Just, "That was yesterday." As if my presence, my effort, my love, all of it, meant nothing more than a calendar mistake. I had been so excited during that long drive. 10 hours through winding mountain roads, my old Honda struggling up the hills, the radio playing those soft songs that reminded me of when Daniel was little. I kept imagining his face when he saw me. Maybe he would run to me like he used to when he was 7, throwing his arms around my waist and telling me I was the best mom in the world. Instead, he looked embarrassed. Embarrassed by me. His friends were there, polished young men in expensive suits, their parents dressed in designer clothes I'd only seen in magazine windows. And there I was, in my best dress from the department store clearance rack, my hands still bearing the calluses from years of double shifts at the diner, my hair pulled back because I hadn't had time to visit a salon in months. I saw how he glanced around, checking if anyone was watching. I saw the way he stepped back slightly, creating distance between us. I saw the exact moment when he decided I didn't belong in his new world. The silver box in my hands suddenly felt heavy. Inside was a watch. Nothing fancy, but it had taken me 3 months to save for it. I had wanted to give him something that would last, something he could look at and remember that his mother believed in him. Now it felt like a joke, like everything about me was outdated and unnecessary. "I saved for months to be here," I whispered, not trusting my voice to speak louder. "I took time off work, I drove through the night." But Daniel was already turning away, his attention drawn to someone calling his name. Someone more important than the woman who had raised him alone, who had worked 3 jobs to pay for his education, who had believed in him when no one else would. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, watching him laugh with people who didn't even know his middle name, who hadn't held his head when he was sick, who hadn't stayed up nights helping him with homework, or worrying when he came home late. If you like stories that touch the heart, please subscribe to our channel. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything to our work. And comment which city you're watching from. The parking lot was full of families taking pictures, hugging, crying happy tears. Everywhere I looked, I saw mothers being celebrated, fathers being thanked, grandparents being honored. But I was invisible, standing alone with a gift no one wanted and a heart that was breaking in places I didn't know could break. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, the jobs I took that I hated just to pay his tuition, the relationships I gave up because I put him first, the dreams I set aside because his dreams seemed more important, the nights I went to bed hungry so he could have lunch money, the times I wore the same clothes for years so he could have new ones. I had given him everything, and now I was nothing to him. As I walked back to my car, my legs felt shaky. I could hear the celebration continuing behind me. Laughter, congratulations, the clink of glasses. Life going on without me, as if I had never been part of it at all. I sat in my Honda for a long time before starting the engine. My hands were trembling as I placed the silver box on the passenger seat. 24 years of motherhood. And this is how it ended? With my son too busy, too embarrassed, too important to acknowledge the woman who gave him life. The drive home was the longest 10 hours of my life. Every mile took me further away from the son I thought I knew, and closer to a truth I wasn't ready to face. I had raised a stranger, someone who could look at my love and see only inconvenience, someone who had learned to take everything I offered and give nothing back. But as the sun set behind the mountains and the road stretched endlessly ahead, something else began to grow inside me. It was quiet at first, barely noticeable beneath the hurt and disappointment, but it was there, steady and warm and surprising. For the first time in 24 years, I wasn't thinking about what Daniel needed. I wasn't planning my next sacrifice or worrying about his problems. I was thinking about myself, about the woman I used to be before I became just Daniel's mother. And I realized I couldn't even remember who that woman was anymore. The signs had been there for years, but I was too busy being the perfect mother to see them. Or maybe I saw them and chose to ignore them, thinking that if I just loved him harder, sacrificed more, gave everything I had, he would remember who had always been there. It started in college, when the calls became shorter and less frequent. "Hi, Mom. Just need to check if my tuition payment went through. Can you send some money for books? My laptop broke. Do you think you could help?" Always needing something, never just calling to talk, to ask how I was doing, to tell me about his life beyond what he needed from me. I told myself he was just busy. College was demanding. Young people had their own worlds to navigate. But deep down, I knew something was changing. The boy who used to tell me everything, who used to seek my advice about everything from homework to heartbreak, was becoming a stranger who only remembered my phone number when his bank account was empty. His girlfriend, Madison, made it worse. She came from money, the kind of family that vacationed in Europe and considered my small town quaint in that condescending way wealthy people do. I met her only once, during Parents' Weekend his junior year. She looked at my second-hand purse and discount store shoes with barely concealed disdain, then spent the entire dinner talking about her father's business connections and her mother's charity galas. Daniel hung on every word she said. He nodded along when she made subtle comments about different backgrounds and expanding horizons. He didn't defend me when she asked, with fake sweetness, what I did for real work beyond serving food to people. He just sat there, letting her diminish me, letting her make me feel small and unworthy of my own son's respect. After that weekend, Daniel's calls became even rarer. When he did call, he would mention Madison's family constantly. How her father was helping him with internship connections. How her mother knew important people in the city. How they were planning their future together. And it all sounded very sophisticated and expensive and far removed from anything I could offer. "Madison thinks I should focus on networking more," he told me once. "She says it's not just about grades, it's about who you know and how you present yourself." I wanted to remind him that I had worked 3 jobs to pay for those grades he was so casually dismissing. I wanted to tell him that the woman who served food to people had served him every day of his life, had made sure he never went hungry or felt unloved or doubted his worth. But I swallowed those words, afraid that speaking them would push him even further away. The graduation invitation arrived in the mail 3 months before the ceremony. A formal card with gold lettering, requesting the honor of my presence at Daniel Marcus Harrison's commencement ceremony. Daniel Marcus Harrison, not Danny, like I'd called him his whole childhood. Not even Daniel Harrison, like his school records had always shown. He had added the Marcus, his father's middle name, the name of a man who had walked away when Daniel was 2 and never looked back. But it was my last name he kept, even as he seemed determined to forget everything else about me. I called him immediately, so excited I could barely contain my voice. "Danny, I got your invitation. I'm so proud of you, honey. I can't wait to be there." There was a pause, longer than it should have been. Then, "Oh, right. Yeah. I wasn't sure. I mean, Madison's family is flying in, and it's going to be pretty formal. You know how these things can be. Pretty formal." As if I didn't understand what formal meant. As if I would show up in my work uniform and embarrass him in front of his new family. Because that's what Madison's parents had become, wasn't it? His real family. The ones worthy of his important day. "I'll dress appropriately," I said quietly, hating that I had to promise such a thing. "I just want to be there for you. This is what we worked for, remember? All those years, all those dreams we talked about? We." The word hung in the air like a challenge. "Mom, I appreciate everything you did, but this is my achievement. I earned this. My achievement." As if I hadn't earned it too. Through every sleepless night I spent working so he could study. Through every sacrifice I made so he could have opportunities I never had. As if love and support and unwavering belief were things that didn't count in his ledger of success. The weeks leading up to graduation were torture. I found myself rehearsing conversations in my head, imagining how proud I would be, how we would celebrate together. I bought a new dress. Not expensive, but the nicest one I'd owned in years. I saved money for a hotel room, even though it meant skipping meals for 2 weeks. I wrapped that watch with such care, choosing silver paper because it looked elegant, writing a card that took me 3 drafts to get right. To my son, my pride, my greatest accomplishment. Congratulations on achieving your dreams. Love always, Mom. I never got to give it to him. The cruelest part wasn't just his dismissal. It was how easily he did it. How effortlessly he could look at my hope and love and turn it into nothing. There was no anger in his voice. No emotion at all. Just casual indifference. As if my 10-hour drive and months of preparation were as forgettable as yesterday's weather. Standing in that parking lot, watching him walk away from me toward Madison and her perfectly polished parents, I finally understood what I had become to him. Not his mother, not the woman who raised him, just an inconvenience from his past, someone who didn't fit into the new identity he was creating for himself. I saw Madison glance over at me, then whisper something in Daniel's ear that made him laugh. I saw her parents look in my direction with the kind of polite dismissal that wealthy people use when they want to make someone disappear without being overtly rude. I saw my son nod along with whatever they were saying, agreeing with their assessment of the woman who had given him everything. That night, alone in the cheap motel room I had booked months in advance, I cried harder than I had since his father left us. But these tears felt different. They weren't just about hurt or disappointment. They were about awakening, about seeing clearly for the first time in years. I had raised a son who was ashamed of me, who saw my love as weakness and my sacrifices as obligations he had already repaid simply by existing. Who could stand in a parking lot and dismiss 24 years of devotion with 5 careless words? But as I lay in that narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to traffic outside my window, I made a decision that would change everything. I spent months after graduation trying to convince myself it was just a misunderstanding, that maybe Daniel was overwhelmed, maybe he had genuinely forgotten to tell me about the date change. I made excuses for him the way I had been making excuses for years, because facing the truth felt too devastating to bear. I called him 2 weeks later, my voice carefully cheerful, pretending nothing had happened. "Hi, honey. I just wanted to see how you're settling into your new job. Are you eating well? Do you need anything?" "Actually, Mom, I'm pretty busy these days. Madison and I are apartment hunting in the city, and her father set up some interviews for me at his company. Things are really taking off." Her father. Always her father now. Never mine. I wanted to remind him that I had been the one who drove him to every job interview during high school, who helped him practice his handshake and taught him to look people in the eye when he spoke. But Madison's father had connections I couldn't provide, doors I couldn't open, a world I couldn't access. "That's wonderful, Danny. Maybe I could visit sometime? See your new place when you get settled?" The pause lasted too long. "We'll see, Mom. You know how it is in the city. Everything moves so fast here. Everything moves so fast." Translation: There's no room for a small-town diner waitress in my new sophisticated life. I tried again a month later, then 2 months, then 3. Each conversation grew shorter, more distant, filled with his accomplishments and Madison's family and plans that never included me. He had gotten the job at her father's firm. They had found a beautiful apartment in an upscale neighborhood. Madison was planning elaborate dinner parties with interesting people from their social circle. I wasn't interesting people. I was just Mom, the woman whose purpose had been completed when he graduated, whose relevance had expired the moment he no longer needed my financial support. The holidays were the worst. Thanksgiving came and went without a call. I cooked a small turkey anyway, setting 2 places at my tiny kitchen table out of habit, then eating alone while staring at the empty chair where Daniel used to sit, complaining about school or telling me about his dreams. Christmas morning, I waited by the phone until noon before I finally called him. "Oh, hey Mom. Sorry. We're at Madison's family's place in Connecticut. It's been crazy here. Her grandmother's house is like something out of a magazine. They have staff and everything." Staff. He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. This boy who used to help me clean our 2-bedroom apartment because we couldn't afford a housekeeper. Now he was impressed by other people's money, other people's privilege, other people's ability to hire someone else to do what his mother had done for free his entire life. "I have your presents," I said quietly. "Whenever you're ready, I can send them or..." Actually, we're pretty swamped with Madison's family stuff. Maybe just mail them? I'll send you my address. Mail them. Like I was some distant relative he barely knew. Not the woman who had stayed up all night sewing his Halloween costumes by hand because store-bought ones were too expensive. I mailed his gifts and never received a thank you call. I sent birthday cards that went unacknowledged. I left voicemails that were never returned. Slowly, agonizingly, I began to understand that my son had divorced me as completely as his father had, but with more cruelty because Daniel knew exactly what he was taking away. The breaking point came on Mother's Day, 6 months after graduation. I had been dreading the day for weeks, knowing it would pass without acknowledgement, but still hoping, stupidly, desperately hoping, that maybe this one day would remind him that I existed. The phone rang at 11 in the morning. For one shining moment, my heart leaped. Danny, finally calling to wish me happy Mother's Day, to tell me he loved me, to remember what we used to be to each other. Mrs. Harrison, this is Jennifer from Madison's wedding planning service. Madison asked me to call and let you know about the engagement party next month. She said you'd want to know about the dress code and gift registry. Engagement party. My son was engaged and I was learning about it from a wedding planner. Not from him, not even from Madison herself, but from a stranger who had been given the job of managing the inconvenient task of informing Daniel's mother. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen, staring at the calendar where I had circled Mother's Day in red pen like I had done every year since Daniel was born. This was my day, the one day that belonged to mothers, and my son had chosen this day to let me know through a third party that he was getting married. The engagement party was in 3 weeks, black tie optional, gift registry at stores I had never heard of, with items that cost more than my monthly rent. A celebration of his new life, his new family, his new identity that had no room for the woman who gave him his first breath. I called him that night, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. Daniel, I heard about your engagement. Congratulations. Oh yeah, thanks. We're really excited. That was it. No explanation for why I had heard it from a stranger. No apology for not telling me himself. No invitation to share in his joy or acknowledgement that this was a momentous occasion in both our lives. The engagement party sounds lovely, I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. I'd love to be there to celebrate with you both. Another pause. Mom, I need to be honest with you. Madison's family has very specific ideas about how they want this to go. It's going to be very formal, very elegant. They're friends, business associates. You know, I think you might feel out of place. Out of place. At my own son's engagement party, I would be out of place. I raised you, Daniel, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I think I can handle a party. I know you did your best, Mom, but this is different. This is Madison's world now, our world, and honestly, I just don't think. I mean, what would you even talk about with these people? They're lawyers and doctors and business owners. They summer in the Hamptons and winter in Aspen. They went to schools like Harvard and Yale. They. Never we. Always they. Because even after dating Madison for 3 years, even after getting engaged to her, Daniel still didn't see himself as belonging to that world either. But he saw me as the thing that would prevent him from belonging. The reminder of where he came from, that had to be hidden away like a shameful secret. I put you through college, I said, my voice growing stronger. I worked 3 jobs so you could go to a good school, so you could have opportunities I never had. I sacrificed everything so you could become the man you are today. And now you're telling me I'm not good enough to celebrate your engagement? It's not about good enough, Mom. It's about fit. You wouldn't fit. I wouldn't fit. The woman who had fit him into her life from the moment he was born, who had rearranged every dream and ambition around his needs, who had made herself smaller so he could become bigger. I wouldn't fit into his new life. That night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw a stranger. A tired woman with graying hair and work-worn hands, wearing a discount store nightgown in a house that felt too quiet and too empty. When had I become this person? When had I stopped being Maria and become only Daniel's mother? And now, apparently, not even that. I had given him everything, and he had taken it all without ever learning to give anything back. I had taught him that love meant sacrifice, that being a mother meant disappearing piece by piece until there was nothing left but service and devotion and endless, unacknowledged giving. And now, standing in that mirror, I realized I had taught him too well. I stopped calling after the engagement party conversation. For the first time in 25 years, I didn't reach out to my son. I didn't send care packages or check if he was eating well or ask about his job. I just stopped. And the silence that followed was deafening because it was so complete. He didn't call either. Days passed, then weeks, then months, and my phone remained silent. The wedding invitation arrived in the mail 4 months later. Heavy cardstock, gold embossing, Madison's family name prominently displayed above Daniel's. No personal note, no phone call to explain the details, just a formal invitation that read like I was a distant acquaintance rather than the mother of the groom. The ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at an exclusive country club I'd never heard of, in a town 3 hours away. I stared at that invitation for hours, turning it over in my hands, reading every elegant word until they blurred together. At the bottom, in small print, black tie required, adults only celebration. Even if I wanted to attend, even if I could afford the kind of formal gown their world demanded, I would be walking into a room full of strangers who had already been told I didn't belong. I called the number on the RSVP card, thinking maybe I would surprise them. Maybe I would show up anyway and prove I could fit into their sophisticated world. But when the wedding coordinator answered and I gave my name, her voice changed immediately. "Oh, Mrs. Harrison. Yes, I have a note here about you." A pause. Papers rustling. "I'm supposed to tell you that seating is very limited, and the event is restricted to immediate family and close friends only. Madison's family has arranged a lovely brunch the following weekend if you'd prefer to celebrate then." A brunch. The following weekend. After the wedding, after the celebration, after all the important moments had passed. A consolation prize for the inconvenient mother who couldn't be completely ignored but didn't deserve to witness the main event. I hung up without responding and sat in my kitchen, still holding the invitation. The silence in my house had become oppressive, but it was nothing compared to the silence from my son. No calls, no texts, no acknowledgement that he was getting married without his mother there. He had found it easier to erase me completely than to deal with the messiness of including me in his new life. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Daniel was a baby. I cried until my chest ached and my eyes were swollen shut. But these weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of rage. Rage at myself for allowing this to happen, for teaching him that my love was free and infinite and required no reciprocation. Rage at him for accepting that lesson so completely. Rage at a world that judged worth by bank accounts and zip codes rather than by the depth of sacrifice and love. I began to have conversations with myself, the way you do when there's no one else to listen. Walking through my empty house, I would talk to the walls, to Daniel's childhood photos still hanging in the hallway, to the air itself. "I gave you everything," I whispered to his high school graduation picture. "I gave you everything, and you took it all and walked away like it meant nothing." His young face smiled back at me from behind the glass, frozen in a moment when he had still called me Mom with genuine affection, when he had still hugged me without checking to see who was watching. I had been so proud that day, so hopeful about our future together. I never imagined I was celebrating the beginning of the end. The house began to feel like a shrine to a relationship that no longer existed. Daniel's bedroom remained exactly as he had left it for college. Posters on the walls, trophies on the shelves, books I had read to him when he was small. His childhood artwork still hung on the refrigerator, yellowed and curling at the edges. Photos of us together covered every surface, documenting a love story that had apparently been one-sided all along. I started taking the pictures down, one by one, not in anger, but in a kind of numb resignation. Each frame I removed revealed a pale rectangle on the wall underneath, a ghost of what used to be there. The house was transforming, becoming less of a monument to Daniel and more of a space where a woman named Maria lived alone. The worst part wasn't even the wedding I wouldn't attend, or the grandchildren I might never meet. The worst part was the gradual realization that I had forgotten who I was outside of being his mother. For 25 years, every decision I made had been filtered through what was best for Daniel. What job would provide him the most stability? What apartment would give him the best school district? What sacrifice would give him the best opportunities? I couldn't remember the last time I had made a decision based purely on what I wanted. I couldn't remember what I enjoyed doing when I wasn't working to pay for his needs or worrying about his problems. I couldn't remember who Maria had been before she became Daniel's mother. Sitting in my quiet living room one evening, surrounded by the empty spaces where his photos used to be, I tried to think of a single dream I had that didn't involve him, a single ambition that was mine alone, a single part of my identity that existed independently of motherhood. I came up empty. Somewhere along the way, I had erased myself so completely that even I couldn't find the original version anymore. I had poured everything I was into raising him, and now that he was gone, I was left with nothing but the hollow outline of a woman who used to exist. The wedding happened without me. I know because Madison posted photos on social media, her in a dress that probably cost more than my car, Daniel in an expensive tuxedo, both of them surrounded by beautiful people in a beautiful setting, everyone smiling and elegant and perfectly coordinated. I studied those photos for hours, looking for some sign that my absence had mattered, some indication that Daniel had noticed the empty chair where his mother should have been. There was nothing. He looked completely happy, utterly content, as if having me there would have been unnecessary at best and embarrassing at worst. The boy I had raised, the son I had loved more than my own life, had gotten married without feeling any need for my presence or blessing. That's when I finally understood the depth of what I had lost. It wasn't just Daniel, it was myself. I had spent so many years defining myself through his achievements, his happiness, his needs, that I had forgotten I was supposed to exist as a separate person. I had taught him that mothers were meant to disappear once their children no longer needed them, and he had learned that lesson perfectly. But as I sat there in my too quiet house, looking at wedding photos of a life that had no room for me, something began to shift inside my chest. It was small at first, barely noticeable beneath all the hurt and disappointment, but it was persistent, growing stronger each day. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it wasn't despair either. It was something else. Something I hadn't felt in decades. It was curiosity. Curiosity about who I might be if I stopped waiting for Daniel to remember he had a mother. Curiosity about what I might discover if I stopped defining myself by his rejection and started exploring what remained of Maria. I still had something they forgot, something even I had forgotten in all those years of putting everyone else first. I still had myself, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The first thing I did was clean out Daniel's room completely, not in anger, but with the methodical precision of someone finally ready to reclaim her own space. I packed his trophies and childhood memorabilia into boxes, storing them in the garage where they belonged. In the past, not dominating my present. I painted the walls a soft lavender, a color I had always loved but never chosen because it wasn't boyish enough for his space. Then I did something I hadn't done in 25 years. I enrolled in a class for myself. The community college offered evening courses, and I found myself drawn to an art class called Beginning Watercolors. I couldn't remember the last time I had held a paintbrush, but something about the idea of creating beauty, instead of just maintaining everyone else's life, felt revolutionary. The first night, my hands shook as I mixed colors on the palette. The instructor, a gentlewoman named Carol who was about my age, noticed my nervousness and sat beside me. "First time painting?" she asked kindly. "First time doing anything just for me," I answered honestly, surprising myself with the admission. Carol smiled. "Those are often the most beautiful paintings. The ones we do when we finally remember we matter too." I painted terrible watercolors that first month. Muddy landscapes and lopsided flowers that bore no resemblance to the graceful demonstrations Carol showed us. But something magical happened as I sat there, brush in hand, focused entirely on the movement of color across paper. For 2 hours each Tuesday evening, I didn't think about Daniel. I didn't wonder what he was doing or whether he was happy, or if he ever thought about me. I just existed as Maria, a woman learning to paint. The other students were a mix of retirees and middle-aged women like myself, each with their own story of delayed dreams and rediscovered passions. There was Ruth, whose husband's death had left her searching for new purpose. Jenny, whose children were grown, and who was finally pursuing the art degree she had set aside for motherhood. Patricia, who had worked as a nurse for 30 years and wanted to create something beautiful instead of just fixing what was broken. We became friends gradually, bonding over shared frustrations with stubborn paint and the simple joy of creating something that hadn't existed before. These women understood what it meant to have spent decades putting everyone else first. They didn't judge me for not knowing who I was at 51 years old. They celebrated with me as I began to find out. "You know," Ruth said one evening as we cleaned our brushes, "I spent 43 years of marriage making sure my husband's shirts were ironed perfectly. After he died, I realized I didn't even know what my favorite color was. I'd been choosing everything based on what he liked." "What is your favorite color?" I asked. She held up a brush loaded with brilliant turquoise paint. "This. Turns out it's this." I started making other small changes. I bought groceries based on what I wanted to eat, not what would have pleased Daniel's palate. I discovered I loved spicy food, exotic flavors that I had avoided because they were too adventurous for a growing boy's taste. I started reading books that interested me rather than the practical parenting guides and financial advice manuals that had filled my shelves for years. Most surprisingly, I began to sleep better. The constant low-level anxiety that had hummed in the background of my life for decades, worry about Daniel's happiness, his health, his future, gradually faded. I realized I had been carrying the weight of 2 lives on my shoulders, and setting down his burden left me feeling lighter than I had in years. 3 months into my art class, I painted something that made me stop and stare. It was a simple landscape, a lone tree on a hill, painted during a lesson on perspective. But something about the way the light fell across the branches, the subtle gradations of color in the sky, the sense of peaceful solitude radiating from the scene, it was beautiful. I had created something beautiful. Carol noticed me studying it and came over to look. "Oh, Maria, this is lovely. You've really found your voice here." My voice. I had a voice in watercolors, apparently. A way of seeing and interpreting the world that was uniquely mine, that had nothing to do with being anyone's mother or caregiver or servant. It was purely Maria, expressing something I didn't even know I had inside me. I framed that painting and hung it in my living room, in the space where Daniel's high school graduation photo used to sit. Every morning I looked at it over my coffee and felt a small surge of pride. Not in something my son had accomplished, but in something I had created with my own hands. Word about my absence from Daniel's wedding had spread through our small town, the way news always does in places where everyone knows everyone else's business. I expected judgment, whispers about what kind of mother misses her own son's wedding. Instead, I found surprising support from unexpected places. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store pulled me aside one afternoon and said quietly, "My daughter moved to California 15 years ago. Calls twice a year if I'm lucky. Sometimes children forget where they came from." The librarian, a woman I'd known peripherally for years, stopped me while I was checking out art books. "I heard about your painting class. Good for you. It's never too late to discover what makes you happy." Even Father Martinez from the church I occasionally attended made a point of mentioning during one of his sermons that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is step back and allow their children to experience the consequences of their choices. He didn't look at me directly, but I felt the message was meant for my ears. I wasn't the only mother in town dealing with ungrateful children, it seemed. I wasn't the only woman who had given everything and received silence in return. There was an invisible sisterhood of mothers who understood the peculiar grief of loving someone who had outgrown their need for your love. The realization that I wasn't alone in this experience was both comforting and infuriating. Comforting because it meant I hadn't failed uniquely as a mother. Infuriating because it meant this pattern of taking mothers for granted was common enough to be almost expected. But something else was happening too. Something I hadn't anticipated. As I stopped reaching out to Daniel, as I stopped making myself available for the emotional labor of maintaining our relationship, I began to notice how one-sided it had always been. In 25 years, he had never called just to check on me. He had never asked about my dreams or worries or health unless it related to something he needed. He had never shown curiosity about my inner life, never treated me as a complete person with thoughts and feelings beyond my role as his mother. I had been so focused on being the perfect mother that I had never required him to be even a decent son. 6 months into my new life, I received a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw a photo of a baby, tiny, wrinkled, perfect. Below it, a message: "Meet your grandson, Michael Daniel Harrison. Born this morning. Madison and baby are doing well." My grandson. Daniel had become a father, and I was learning about it through a text message from what I assumed was Madison's phone. No call, no invitation to meet the baby. Just a clinical announcement like I was a distant relative who needed to be informed but not included. I stared at that photo for a long time. This beautiful child who carried my genes, my son's eyes, my family's stubborn chin. I felt the old familiar pull, the urge to drop everything and drive to wherever they were, to beg for a chance to hold my grandson, to prove I could be the perfect grandmother if they would just give me the opportunity. But I didn't move. I sat in my lavender-painted room looking at the painting I had created and made a different choice. I turned off my phone and went to paint. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was simply the recognition that I had been chasing people who were running away from me, and it was time to stop running after them. For the first time in my adult life, I chose myself, and it felt like coming home to someone I had been waiting my whole life to meet. A year passed without any contact from Daniel, a full year of silence while I rebuilt myself piece by piece, discovering parts of my personality that had been dormant for decades. I learned that I was naturally social when I wasn't exhausted from working 3 jobs. I found out I had a sharp sense of humor that made my art class friends laugh until they cried. I discovered I was braver than I'd ever imagined possible. My watercolors improved dramatically. What had started as shaky experiments evolved into confident expressions of a perspective I was still discovering. Carol suggested I submit a piece to the local art fair, and to my amazement, it sold within 2 hours. A stranger had seen something I created and thought it was beautiful enough to hang in their home. The feeling was intoxicating. I started teaching myself to cook elaborate meals for one, recipes I'd always wanted to try but had avoided because Daniel preferred simple food. I learned to make Thai curry that set my mouth on fire in the most delicious way. I mastered French pastries that required patience and precision. I discovered I loved the meditative process of kneading bread, the alchemy of turning basic ingredients into something warm and nourishing. My house transformed into a space that reflected my tastes rather than accommodating everyone else's needs. I bought furniture I actually liked. A deep purple velvet armchair where I could read for hours. Bookshelves to hold the growing collection of art books and novels I devoured. Plants that turned my living room into a small jungle of green serenity. I even started dating, something that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. A man named Robert from my art class asked me to coffee. And after a month of internal debate, I said yes. He was kind, recently divorced, with grown children who called him regularly and genuinely seemed to enjoy his company. Watching his relationships with his kids showed me how different things could have been, how much I had accepted as normal that was actually profoundly dysfunctional. "My daughter calls me every Sunday," he mentioned casually during our 3rd date. "Not because she needs anything, just to talk. She tells me about her week, asks about mine. We're friends, you know. I like her as a person, not just as my child." I nodded and smiled, but inside I felt a sharp pang of recognition. I had never been friends with Daniel. I had been his devoted servant, his financial support, his emotional safety net, but never his friend. He had never been curious about me as a person, never sought my opinion on topics unrelated to his immediate needs, never shared his thoughts just because he valued my perspective. Robert and I took things slowly. After decades of putting everyone else first, the idea of being someone's priority felt foreign and wonderful. He brought me flowers not because it was a holiday, but because he saw them and thought of me. He remembered details from our conversations and followed up on them later. He treated me like someone worth getting to know, worth spending time with, worth pursuing. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset and sharing a bottle of wine, he asked me something that stopped me cold. "Maria, what's your biggest dream?" If you could do anything, be anything, what would it be? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I had no idea. For so many years, my dreams had been extensions of Daniel's dreams. I wanted him to be happy, successful, fulfilled. But what did I want for myself, independent of anyone else's happiness? I don't know, I admitted. I honestly don't know. Robert didn't seem shocked or disappointed by this answer. That's okay. Dreams can be discovered at any age. Maybe that's your next adventure, figuring out what you want your life to look like. That conversation stayed with me for weeks. What did I want my life to look like? For the first time in decades, I had the freedom to choose. And the possibilities felt both exciting and overwhelming. I started making lists, the way I used to when Daniel was young, and I was trying to organize his school schedule and activities. But these lists were different. They were about me, places I wanted to visit, skills I wanted to learn, experiences I wanted to have. I wrote them in a beautiful journal I bought specifically for this purpose, treating my dreams with the same care I had once devoted to planning Daniel's future. One item on my list surprised me with its urgency. I wanted to travel. I had never been more than a few hundred miles from home, always too busy or too broke or too worried about leaving Daniel to explore the world beyond our small town. Now, with my savings account slowly growing from art sales and my newfound confidence in my ability to navigate unfamiliar situations, travel felt possible for the first time. I booked a trip to Santa Fe, New Mexico, drawn by photos of the desert landscapes and adobe architecture. The week I spent there felt like visiting another planet. The light was different, sharper, more dramatic than the soft humidity of home. The colors were more intense, the sky bigger, the sense of possibility unlimited. I painted every day, capturing scenes that stretched my skills and imagination in ways I hadn't known were possible. Most importantly, I discovered I was excellent company for myself. I ate dinner alone in beautiful restaurants without feeling self-conscious. I struck up conversations with strangers and found them fascinating. I navigated unfamiliar streets with confidence, trusting my instincts and judgment in ways I hadn't in years. On my last night in Santa Fe, I called Robert from my hotel room, wanting to share my excitement about the trip. We talked for an hour about the places I'd seen, the paintings I'd started, the plans I was making for future adventures. "You sound different," he said as our conversation was winding down. "Happier. More yourself, if that makes sense." It made perfect sense. I was more myself than I had been in decades. I was becoming someone I actually liked, someone whose company I enjoyed, someone with opinions and interests and dreams that belonged to no one but me. When I returned home, I found 17 missed calls on my phone, all from the same number, a number I recognized but hadn't heard from in over a year. Daniel had been trying to reach me while I was discovering how big and beautiful the world could be when you weren't waiting for someone else to acknowledge your existence. I didn't call him back immediately. I unpacked my suitcase, hung my new paintings around the house, called Robert to let him know I was home safely. I made myself dinner and sat in my purple armchair, looking at the life I had built for myself in the space where my grief used to live. Only then did I listen to the voicemails. The first few were awkward, stilted attempts at casual conversation. "Hey, Mom, just calling to check in. Call me back when you get this." But as the messages progressed, I could hear something changing in his voice. Confusion, then concern, then something that sounded almost like panic. "Mom, it's me again. I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. Are you okay? Please call me back." The last message was different. His voice was smaller, younger, more like the boy I remembered. "Mom, I don't know what's wrong, but Madison thinks maybe something happened to you. We're worried. Please call me back and let me know you're all right. We're worried." For the first time in years, my son was worried about me. Not because he needed something, not because my silence was inconveniencing his life, but because he had suddenly realized that I was a person who could disappear, who could have a life and experiences and even emergencies that didn't revolve around his needs. I held the phone in my hands, feeling the weight of a decision that would determine the direction of whatever relationship we might still have. I could call him back and slip back into the old patterns, reassure him that I was fine and available whenever he needed me. I could pretend the past year of silence hadn't changed anything fundamental about who I was and what I was willing to accept. Or I could continue being the woman I had discovered in that lavender-painted room, the woman who created beautiful things and traveled to new places and refused to chase after people who had shown her she wasn't wanted. The phone rang again. Daniel, calling for the 18th time. This time, I answered. Mom, thank God. Where have you been? We've been calling for days. The relief in Daniel's voice was genuine, but underneath it I heard something else. Irritation that his calls had gone unanswered. Frustration that I hadn't been immediately available when he decided he needed me. Even his worry was tinged with the assumption that my time belonged to him. I've been traveling, I said calmly, settling back into my purple armchair. I went to Santa Fe for a week. It was beautiful. Silence. Then, you went to Santa Fe? By yourself? Mom, you've never traveled anywhere. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't I tell him? The question hung in the air, loaded with assumptions that had gone unchallenged for too long. Why should I tell him about my travels when he hadn't told me about his engagement, his wedding, the birth of his son? Why should I seek his permission or approval for living my own life when he had made it clear that my existence was peripheral to his? I didn't think you'd be interested, I said simply. You've been busy with your new life. That's not, of course I'd be interested. You're my mother. The word hung between us. Mother. As if that explained everything. As if invoking that title somehow erased the years of silence and dismissal and casual cruelty. As if being his mother meant I should be grateful for any scraps of attention he chose to throw my way. Yes, I said quietly. I am your mother. The same mother you didn't invite to your graduation celebration. The same mother you told wouldn't fit at your engagement party. The same mother who learned about your wedding from a coordinator and about your son from a text message. Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, defensive, uncomfortable. Mom, those were difficult situations. Madison's family had very specific ideas about how they wanted things to go. I was trying to keep everyone happy, everyone except me. But I didn't say that. I had moved beyond needing to point out the obvious cruelties. Instead, I waited. Look, he continued, I know things have been strained between us, but Madison thinks it would be good for Michael to know his grandmother. We were thinking maybe you could come visit, meet your grandson, Madison thinks. Even now, even in this conversation that was supposedly about our relationship, he was hiding behind someone else's opinion rather than expressing his own feelings. And the offer to meet my grandson was presented like a favor he was doing for me, not an acknowledgement that excluding me from his life had been wrong. When? I asked. Well, we're pretty busy through the holidays. Madison's parents are coming, and then we have New Year's plans. Maybe sometime in February? March might be better, actually. Sometime in February, maybe March. Meeting my own grandson was something to be squeezed into their social calendar when it was convenient, when Madison's more important family members weren't visiting. I looked around my living room, at my paintings on the walls, at the travel books stacked on my coffee table, at the life I had built that had nothing to do with waiting for his attention. No, I said. No? What do you mean no? I mean no, Daniel. I won't be fitting myself into whatever window of time you decide to offer me. I won't be the consolation prize grandmother who gets the leftover moments when everyone more important is busy. Mom, that's not... You're being dramatic. We're trying to include you. You're trying to manage me. The same way you've been managing me for years, keeping me at a distance that feels comfortable for you, offering just enough contact to keep me from complaining, but never enough to actually have a real relationship. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, processing this version of his mother he had never encountered before. The Maria who had been desperate for any acknowledgement from him was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to value herself. I don't understand why you're being like this, he said finally. I'm calling you. I'm trying to reconnect. Isn't this what you wanted? What I wanted. He still didn't understand that what I had wanted was a son who called because he loved me, not because he had suddenly realized I might not be available forever. What I had wanted was to be included in the important moments, not offered consolation visits months after the fact. What I wanted, I said carefully, was a son who valued me enough to include me in his life voluntarily. What I wanted was to matter to you before you thought you might lose me. You do matter to me, Mom. You're my mother. There was that word again. Mother. As if it were an explanation rather than just a biological fact. As if it automatically entitled me to love and respect regardless of how he actually treated me. Daniel, I said. And for the first time in years, I used his full name instead of the childhood nickname that had never fit the man he'd become. Do you know anything about my life? Do you know what I do with my time? What makes me happy? What I dream about? Well, you work at the diner and you... He trailed off, and I knew he was realizing that his knowledge of me began and ended with my function in his childhood. He knew I worked to pay his bills, but he had never asked what I did for myself. He knew I had raised him alone, but he had never wondered what I might want to do with my life once that job was finished. I haven't worked at the diner in 3 years, I said gently. I take art classes now. I paint watercolors. I've sold several pieces. I have friends who know me as Maria, not as Daniel's mother. I travel. I read books about art history and philosophy. I'm dating a wonderful man who treats me like someone worth getting to know. Another silence. I could almost hear him processing this information, trying to reconcile it with his image of me as someone whose entire existence revolved around being his mother. You're dating someone? Of all the things I had told him, that was what he focused on. Not my art, not my travels, not the new life I had built for myself. Just surprised that I might be worthy of someone else's romantic attention. His name is Robert. We've been seeing each other for 8 months. He's kind and funny and intelligent. He listens when I talk and remembers what I tell him. He treats me like a complete person, not just someone who exists to serve other people's needs. 8 months? Daniel's voice was sharp now, almost accusatory. You've been dating someone for 8 months and never mentioned it? The irony was breathtaking. He was offended that I hadn't shared my personal life with him, when he had shared nothing of his own life with me for years. He was hurt that I had kept secrets, when his entire adult life had been one long exercise in excluding me from everything that mattered to him. When would I have mentioned it, Daniel? During one of our frequent phone calls? In between all the conversations we have about our lives and feelings and relationships? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller. I guess I just always thought you'd be there. Available, you know. Like you always were. Available. The word encapsulated everything that had been wrong between us for years. I had been available, endlessly, unconditionally available, and he had taken that availability for granted, assuming it would continue indefinitely regardless of how he treated me. I was available, Daniel. For 25 years, I was completely available to you. And you used that availability without ever offering anything in return. You took everything I gave and never once asked what I might need from you. I didn't know you needed anything from me. You always seemed so capable, so strong, like you had everything under control. So I had been too good at my job, too successful at making his life easy, at handling every problem and meeting every need without complaint. I had hidden my own struggles so well that he had genuinely believed I didn't have any. I needed to feel valued, I said quietly. I needed to feel like I mattered to you beyond what I could provide. I needed you to be curious about my life, to care about my happiness, to treat me like a person instead of just a resource. I do care about your happiness, Mom. No, Daniel. You care about my availability. You care about knowing that I'll be there when you decide you need me. But you've never once asked what would make me happy. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken truths and unmet needs. I could hear him struggling, trying to find words that would somehow make this conversation go back to the familiar patterns, where I accepted whatever he was willing to give and was grateful for it. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I had learned to paint sunsets and travel alone and love myself enough to require more than scraps from people who claimed to care about me. So, what do you want from me? He asked finally, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. What did I want from him? The question I had been asking myself for over a year. the answer I had been afraid to voice even to myself. I want you to earn a place in my life, I said clearly, the same way I had to earn a place in yours. 6 months passed after that phone call. 6 months of silence while Daniel, I assumed, tried to figure out how to earn a place in my life. I didn't wait for him to decide. I continued painting, traveling, building relationships with people who saw me as a complete person. Robert and I took a trip to Italy together, where I painted landscapes that took my breath away, and discovered that I was brave enough to navigate foreign countries and confident enough to order meals in broken Italian. I had my first solo art show at a small gallery in town. 23 of my watercolors, each one representing a piece of the woman I had become after I stopped defining myself through other people's needs. The opening night was magical. Friends from my art class, neighbors, even some strangers who had seen the newspaper announcement. Robert stood beside me, proud and supportive, as people complimented my work and asked about my technique and inspiration. For the first time in my adult life, I was being celebrated for something that was entirely mine. That's when I saw Daniel standing in the doorway. He looked older, more uncertain than I remembered. Gone was the confident young man who had dismissed me in that graduation parking lot. He stood there in his expensive suit, clutching a small bouquet of flowers, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. Our gazes met across the gallery, and I saw something in his face I hadn't seen in years. Humility. He didn't approach immediately. Instead, he walked slowly through the exhibit, stopping at each painting, studying them with an attention I had never seen him give to anything related to me. He spent long minutes in front of my Santa Fe series, the bold desert landscapes that had marked my awakening to possibility. He stood even longer before a self-portrait I had painted months earlier, a woman with silver-streaked hair and confident eyes, surrounded by the colors of a life fully lived. When he finally reached me, he didn't speak right away. He just looked at me, really looked, as if seeing me for the first time. "Mom," he said quietly, and his voice cracked slightly on the word. "I had no idea. They're beautiful. You're an artist." "I am," I said simply, without false modesty or the need to downplay my accomplishments. "I'm an artist." "I'm proud of you," he said, and I could hear that he meant it. But I also heard the surprise in his voice, the wonder that I could be something beyond what he had expected me to be. "Thank you," I said, accepting his praise without the desperate gratitude I might have shown years earlier. His pride was nice, but it wasn't necessary for my sense of worth anymore. He handed me the flowers, not expensive ones, just simple daisies from the grocery store, the kind I had always loved, but he had never noticed. "I remember you liked these," he said tentatively. "You used to pick them from the yard when I was little." It was such a small thing, but it represented something monumental. He had remembered something about me, something that had nothing to do with what I could provide for him. Robert appeared at my elbow, sensing the significance of this moment. I introduced them, watching as my son shook hands with the man who had learned to love me for who I was, rather than what I could do. "Your mother is remarkable," Robert said warmly. "She's one of the most talented artists I know." Daniel nodded, but I could see him processing this. The idea that other people saw me as remarkable, that I had value in the world that existed independently of our relationship. The gallery began to empty as the evening wound down, but Daniel lingered. When it was just the three of us and the gallery owner cleaning up, he asked if we could talk privately. Robert squeezed my hand and went to help with the cleanup, giving us space. "I've been thinking about what you said," Daniel began, his voice careful, measured, "about earning a place in your life. I didn't understand what you meant at first. I thought being your son was enough. That biology gave me the right to your love and attention regardless of how I treated you." He paused, looking around at my paintings again. "But seeing this, seeing what you've built for yourself, seeing how happy you look, I realize I never really knew you at all. I knew Daniel's mother, but I never knew Maria. It was the first time he had used my name in years, and hearing it from him felt like a small miracle. I was selfish," he continued. "Not just inconsiderate or thoughtless, actually selfish. I took everything you gave and convinced myself I deserved it just for existing. I never once asked what you needed, what you wanted, what would make you happy. I waited, saying nothing, These were words I had waited years to hear, but I needed them to come from his heart, not from his guilt. Madison and I are having problems, he said quietly, probably getting divorced. And you know what's funny? One of the things she complains about is that I take her for granted, that I expect her to manage our life while I focus on my career, that I don't really see her as a person, just as someone who's supposed to support me. He laughed bitterly. I learned that pattern from you, from watching you give everything and ask for nothing. Except you didn't teach me that because you wanted to. You taught me that because you thought unconditional giving was what love looked like. The insight surprised me with its accuracy. I had modeled a kind of love that was completely one-sided, thinking I was showing him what devotion looked like. Instead, I had taught him to be a taker, someone who expected love to flow toward him without reciprocation. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for treating you like you didn't matter. I'm sorry for being embarrassed by you instead of being proud of who you are. I'm sorry for taking 26 years to realize that you're a person with your own dreams and needs and worth. The apology was everything I had wanted to hear, but I found that I didn't need it the way I once had. I had healed from those wounds, built a life that didn't depend on his acknowledgement of my value. I forgive you, I said, and meant it completely. But forgiveness doesn't automatically restore a relationship, Daniel. Trust has to be rebuilt. Respect has to be earned. He nodded, understanding finally that love without respect was hollow, that access to my life was no longer his birthright. How do I do that? How do I earn back a place in your life? I looked at this man who had been my whole world for so many years, who had broken my heart so completely that I had to learn to rebuild myself from scratch. He was still my son, but he was no longer the center of my universe. That change had freed both of us, even if he was only beginning to understand it. Start by getting to know me, I said. Not as your mother, but as Maria. Ask me about my paintings, my travels, my relationship with Robert. Show interest in my life the way you would with any person you cared about. Call me because you want to talk to me, not because you need something. And Michael? He asked hesitantly. Would you like to meet your grandson? I smiled, thinking of the baby I had glimpsed in that text message photo over a year ago. I would love to meet him, I said. When you're ready to introduce me as someone important in your life, not as an obligation you're fulfilling. When you can tell him stories about his grandmother that aren't just about how much she sacrificed, but about who she is and what she's accomplished. Daniel's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw the little boy he used to be, the child who had once thought I was the most important person in the world. I want to know you, Mom. I want to know Maria. I want to learn how to be your son instead of just someone who happened to be born to you. 3 years have passed since that night in the gallery. Daniel and I talk every week now. Real conversations about art and politics and books and life. He asks about Robert, remembers details from our previous calls, shares his own struggles with genuine vulnerability. He's in therapy, working on the patterns that destroyed his marriage and learning to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided taking. I've met my grandson Michael many times now. Daniel tells him stories about my art, brings him to my studio to watch me paint. Michael calls me Grandma Maria and knows me as the woman who travels to interesting places and creates beautiful things, not just as someone who exists to serve his family. Most importantly, I've learned that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. It's servitude. I've learned that teaching someone to value you starts with valuing yourself. I've learned that it's never too late to remember who you are beneath all the roles you've played for other people. I'm 64 now, and I've never been happier. I paint almost every day, travel with Robert to places I dreamed about for decades, maintain friendships with people who see my worth clearly. I have a son who has learned to love me as a complete person, and a grandson who will grow up understanding that grandmothers are individuals with their own stories to tell. Sometimes people ask me if I regret those years of putting everyone else first, if I'm angry about the time I lost. But I've learned that every experience, even the painful ones, contributed to who I am today. The woman who can paint light on water and navigate foreign cities and require respect in her relationships was shaped by the woman who sacrificed everything for an ungrateful child. The difference is that now I know my worth isn't determined by how much I give up for others. It's determined by how fully I embrace the gift of being myself, and that gift, I've discovered, is more than enough.